Today is part two of yesterday's episode. We are picking the win total for each SEC team going into the 2024 season using the odds provided to us by FanDuel Sportsbook.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part two of picking every team in the SEC's win total. Once again, courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. Yesterday, we did Texas and then Alabama through LSU on part one, right? Picking the win total for each team today. We'll do Texas once again, a refresher, right? And then we'll go Mississippi State to Vanderbilt to close it out. Once again, picking the SEC win total or the win total for each SEC team going through all 12 games on their schedule, telling you if you should pick the over or the under if you decide to bet. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if you didn't get a chance to check out yesterday's episode, once again, went through Texas and then Alabama to LSU in alphabetical order, please go do so, right? You don't have to watch yesterday's episode to understand what's going on today's episode, but I'd appreciate it if you could check out part one and part two. So once again, on today's episode, we'll go from Mississippi State to Vanderbilt, going through all 12 games on each respective team's schedule, picking a win or a loss, therefore telling you if you should take the over or under, if my word means anything to you. Because this is Locked On Longhorns, I'm going to do a refresher and start with Texas again, right? It would feel a little weird to talk for 20 to 30 minutes on the show without mentioning Texas outside of being an opponent on other teams' schedules. So do a refresher on Texas, and then we'll go through Mississippi State to Vanderbilt, each SEC team's win total going into the 2024 season, odds provided to us by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. That's what we do on Locked On Longhorns. Starting with the Texas Longhorns, what I'm about to say may make some people mad, right? If you're watching or listening or heard it through the grapevine, I will preference what I'm about to say by saying that I was very wrong last year, right? In terms of my predictions. And there is a chance that I could be very wrong in 2024, right? So yeah, hopefully that's the case. Last year, I picked Texas to go 10-2. I believe their win total was at 10.5. So they smashed over because I wouldn't say they smashed over, but they went over. They went 11-1 with their only loss being to Oklahoma in the regular season. I said that I would take the under last year, so I was wrong. I said they would go 10-2, and I said their two losses would be to Kansas State and Alabama, and they won both of those games, right? So maybe I'll be just as wrong this year as I was last season. When you look at it, their win total, once again, is set at 10.5. So if you bet the over, you're saying they'll win 11 or 12 games. If you bet the under, you're saying they'll win 10 or below. The over odds plus 100. So you bet 100 to make 100 on the over. On the under, you would have to bet $122 to make 100, right? So Vegas is telling you they believe in the first year in the SEC, Texas is closer to a 10-win team than an 11-win team. And I tend to agree with Vegas on this one. Hopefully me and Vegas are wrong for the second straight year, right? When you look at it, their 2024 schedule, they start off at home on August 31st against Colorado State. Texas is going to mollywop Colorado State. They should win that game by 20-plus points. September 7th at Michigan. I've said on the podcast this should be a must-win game for Texas. I believe Texas is the more talented team. They have more continuity on their coaching staff. It's a lot of talent that left Michigan, a lot of really good coaches that left Michigan. But I think this game is going to be a grinded out run game, defensive type of game in that environment, 100,000 strong in Ann Arbor. And I think Michigan just finds a way to squeak out a win. And I think that defense is going to be flying. They just brought in Wink Martindale, a huge pickup as their defensive coordinator. So I think Texas is the better team. But right now, my gut is telling me Michigan finds a way to win the game. Maybe that'll change as we get closer to September 7th. They return home for 3 games, September 14th, September 21st, and September 28th against UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, and Mississippi State, respectively. Against UTSA and ULM, I expect Arch Manning to get a lot of playing time. We win both of those games big. Against Mississippi State in our first SEC game ever, you got Mississippi State coming in our house with a new quarterback in Blake Shapen, who we beat before, new coach in Jeff Lebby, right? And I just think Texas is going to dominate that matchup at home. First SEC game, they're going to be fired up. Then we have a bye week. Then we go to the Cotton Bowl to play against Oklahoma and Red River, right? I think Texas avenges their loss from last year, and Steve Sarkisian in perfectly fitting Red River fashion, right? Starts his career against Oklahoma 2-2. I think Texas wins that game. They come back home on October 19th to play against Georgia, two of the best teams in college football. I think Georgia still is the premier program in the sport right now. Hard-fought game, comes down to the wire, comes down to the fourth quarter. But I do believe as of right now, Georgia leaves Austin on October 19th with a victory. That would give Texas their second loss of the season, therefore making the over, not a good bet at that point, right? If everything happens like I say it will. Then you end the season with 5 games at Vanderbilt, against Florida, at Arkansas, against Kentucky at home, and at Texas A&M. I think Texas wins all 5 of those games. I think Texas makes the playoffs and the SEC championship, but I don't think the over hits. I think Texas goes 10-2 in the regular season next year. Now we're going to Mississippi State. Over under is set at 4.5, right? So you're picking the over if you think they're a 5-win team or more, or you're picking the under if you think they're a 4-win team or less. The over odds minus 106, right? So you have to bet 106 to make 100 on the over. Under odds are minus 114. You have to bet 114 to make 100 on the under. So Vegas is somewhat neutral on Mississippi State. Let's see how we feel after we go through the schedule. First game at home against Eastern Kentucky. Definitely should win that game. Second game gets a little bit interesting at Arizona State. I know Arizona State wasn't too good last season, but Jaden Rashada's coming back, right? He's there because of the Florida debacle with the NIL. So I think they'll be really good at the quarterback position. And I think Arizona State has some sneaky talent on that team. We saw them compete last year with some of the best Pac-12 teams. And, forever Longhorn Troy O'Meary is there, right? He had a really good year last year. I think Arizona State's going to win that game, right? So I think Mississippi State starts off 1-1. Then they play Toledo at home. I think they win that game. So now they're 1-2, or 2-1, excuse me. Then they play Florida at home and at Texas over their next 2 games. I think they lose both of those games to fall to 2-3 going into the bye week. They play at Georgia. I believe they lose that game, so they're now 2-4. Not much needs to be said about playing at Georgia, right? Then they play Texas A&M at home. I don't think Texas A&M are going to be world beaters in 2024, but I do think they win some very important games. I think Texas A&M wins that game, right? So I think now we're looking at Mississippi State at being a 2-5 football team. They get Arkansas at home. I think they win that game. They get UMass at home. I think they win that game. So now they are 4-5. They go to Tennessee. I think they lose that game at Rocky Top. So they're 4-6. They play Missouri at home. I think they lose. And then at Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl, they lose all 3 of their last 3 games. So that would put them at 4-8. I see why Vegas is in the middle, because that Arizona State game could be a toss-up. The Arkansas game could be a toss-up. That Texas A&M game could be a toss-up. Hell, even the Florida game could be a toss-up. So I would bet the under. I think they're going to win 4 games, but I could easily see them winning 5 or 6 and the over hidden. So, bet at your own risk, right? But Mississippi State, definitely an interesting team with some interesting odds going into 2024. Missouri, over under set at 9.5, right? Missouri is back on top, right? Or at least one of the top teams of college football. 9.5 is crazy. So you're betting the over if you're saying they're going to be a 10-win team or better. You're betting the under if you think they're going to be 9-3 or worse. Over odds plus 142, right? So $100 bet on the over would land you $142. Under odds minus 176. You'd have to bet 176 on the under to make $100. Vegas is screaming at you that they think Missouri will be a 9-3 football team or worse. If you think they'll win 10 games, there could be some good money headed your way. Let's go through the schedule. Murray State at home, they win that game. Buffalo at home, week 2, they win that game. Boston College at home, week 3, they win that game. Vanderbilt at home, week 4, they win that game. So they start off 4-0 on their schedule. They get a bye week, then they go to Texas A&M. I think they win that game and start 5-0. At UMass, 6-0, right? Then they play Auburn for homecoming. Can't remember what I picked that game on Auburn's schedule, but I'm going to say 7-0. I did pick the Missouri to win that game. So I think Missouri starts off 7-0, right? Over under 9.5. I got Missouri starting off 7-0. I guess this is where it gets interesting. At Alabama, their next game, I believe they lose that one. So they're now 7-1. They get a bye. They get Oklahoma at home. This is going to be a crazy rivalry game. Caden Green left Oklahoma and went to Missouri. I think Theo Weiss may still be there, right? So it's a lot of tension. These fan bases have been talking crazy on Twitter for months, right? And they're going to continue to talk until this game kicks off on November 9th. Really don't know which way to go with this game. It's at home, though. I'm going to pick Missouri, all right? I'm going to pick Missouri. So at this point, they're 8-1 at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, their next 2 games. I believe they get to 10-1. And then they play Arkansas at home, 11-1. So I would hit the over on Missouri, right? I'm probably wrong. They're definitely going to probably lose more than one game, especially with this schedule. But I don't see 3 losses on it, right? I definitely don't see 3 losses on it. I would hit the over on Missouri with plus 142 odds. That could be a really good bet for you this offseason that could turn into some really good cash at the end of the football season. A quick word from our sponsors, and we get into Oklahoma, right? One of our biggest rivals. Over under set at 7.5. Can the Sooners win 8 games? We talk about it next. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by, what is it brought to you by? FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Just bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the National Basketball Association. So Texas and Oklahoma are the 2 teams that are joining the SEC next year, and a lot of people feel as though that Oklahoma has a lot more to prove than Texas does, right? And I completely agree with that. When you look at what Texas was able to do last year, beating Alabama, going 12-2, making the college football playoffs, while Oklahoma lost to teams they had no business losing to, like Kansas and Oklahoma State. It makes sense why people question if Oklahoma will have success in year 1 in the SEC, right? Then when you look at what they've lost on their roster compared to what they brought in or what they have waiting in the wings, and then you look at that in contrast to what Texas has lost, what they've brought in the portal, and what they still have, right? Especially when you look at the quarterback position going in with Quinn Ewers compared to Jackson Arnold, who's made, 1 start, right? And Quinn Ewers is in year 3. Texas certainly seems like they're way better set up for success early in that conference than Oklahoma is. So when we look at Oklahoma, their over-under is set at 7.5, right? So you're either betting on them to win 8 or more games, or you're betting on them to win 7 or less. The over odds, this is insane, is plus 130, right? If you think Oklahoma will win 8 games in 2024, you can bet 100 to make 100. Plus 130 for Oklahoma to win 8 games just feels crazy. But they are going into the SEC. They are going into the SEC with a lot of question marks. So, it could be a chance to make some big money if you want to bet on Oklahoma to win 8 games. The under, minus 160, right? So you'd have to bet 160 to win 100. Vegas is screaming at you, literally screaming, that they think Oklahoma will be a 7-5 or worse football team in 2024, which I think is kind of crazy. But let's go through the schedule and see what happens, right? I think they play Temple at home, Houston, and Tulane in their first 3 games. I think they win all 3 of those games, right? So I think they start off 3-0. Then they get Tennessee at home. I believe they win that game as well, right? I think Oklahoma starts off 4-0 on their schedule. At Auburn, I picked Oklahoma to win that game. So I think Auburn starts off 5-0. I mean, Texas starts off, oh my gosh. Oklahoma starts off 5-0. Then they have a bye. They lose to Texas in Red River. So they're now 5-1. But then they play South Carolina at home. That next game, they beat them. So they're 6-1, right? So they're already 2 wins away from hitting the over. At Ole Miss, I believe they lose that game, right? I think Ole Miss is going to be really good this year, right? But then they play Maine. I believe they win that game, right? They play at Missouri. I'm giving Missouri the edge in that game. Then they play Alabama at home. I believe they lose that game. And they play at LSU. I believe they lose that game. So I have them losing to Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, and LSU. And I have them going 7-5. The under would hit. So Vegas thinks they're going to be a 7-5 or worse football team. Looking at their schedule, I think they're going to be a 7-5 or worse football team. Great odds on the over, but I'm not sure if you can look at that schedule and see only 4 losses for the Oklahoma Sooners, especially if you're a Longhorn fan, right? Moving on to Ole Miss, right? One of the best teams in the country, certainly one of the best teams in the SEC. When you look at their win total, over under set at 9.5, right? So you're either betting the over on Ole Miss winning 10, 11, or 12 games, or you're betting the under that they'll go 9-3 or worse. If you're betting the over, the odds are -144, right? Huge odds. Vegas is screaming at you that they think Ole Miss will win 10 games or more. The under is +118. If you believe that Ole Miss will only win 9 games or fewer, then you can win plus money, right? $118 or $100 bet would win you $118. So let's go through Ole Miss's schedule and see if they're a 10-win team or a 9 or less win team, right? First game on the schedule at home against Furman, they win that game, 1-0. Second week of the schedule at home against Middle Tennessee, they're 2-0. At Wake Forest, they're 3-0. And then at home against Georgia Southern, they're 4-0. Kentucky at home for homecoming, they're 5-0. At South Carolina, they're 6-0, right? At LSU for the 7th week of the season, they beat LSU last year, scoring 55 points. I believe LSU avenges that loss. I think Ole Miss loses their first game of the season at LSU, right? Then they go, they don't go on the road. They have a bye week. Then they play Oklahoma at home. I believe they win that game, right? They play at Arkansas. I believe they win that game. This is the game that's interesting, but I said on yesterday's episode, I believe Georgia goes 11-1. I feel like Lane Kiffin finally gets over the hump and gets a win against Georgia or Alabama. I believe Ole Miss is going to be a really good game, one of the best games of the season. But I think at least right now, Ole Miss beats Georgia at home. They get a bye and they play at Florida. I believe they win that game. And then Mississippi State, I believe they win that game. So I have Ole Miss based on their schedule going 11-1 at worst, 10-2, right? Even if I'm crazy and they lose to Georgia, I still have them going 10-2. I would bet the over. Vegas thinks they're going to be a 10-win team. That's why the odds are so inflated at -144. So if you got kahunas and you think Ole Miss will go 9-3 or worse, that's probably a better bet because you can get plus money at +118. But like I said, looking at this schedule, I don't see any scenario where Ole Miss doesn't win 10 games in 2024. Then we are looking at South Carolina, right? They're over under 5.5. So you're betting the over on them being a 6-win or better football team, or the under 5 wins or worse. The over odds -124, right? So 100, you would have to bet $124 to make 100. Vegas is telling you that South Carolina, right, more than likely will be a 6-win or better football team. The under, if you think they'll win 5 games or worse, is +102, right? So that's still pretty even, right? Vegas isn't just saying there's no chance that they'll win 5 games or less, but they are leaning more towards South Carolina being a 6-win team, which makes sense, right? When these teams have 4 non-conference games and 3 of them are FCS teams, I mean, that's 3 wins right there. You'd think they could find 3 more on the schedule. When you look at it, they play Old Dominion at home. I think they win that game. Then they play at Kentucky. Well, I really wish I could remember how I picked this game for Kentucky, but I only picked Kentucky to win 4 games. So more than likely, I said South Carolina's going to win this game. So I got South Carolina starting off 2-0. Then they play LSU at home. I think LSU wins that game. So South Carolina is 2-1. Then they play Akron. They start off 3-1. They have a bye. They play against Ole Miss at home. I believe they lose that game. So they're now 3-2. At Alabama, they're 3-3. At Oklahoma, they're 3-4. They get Texas A&M at home for their homecoming game. The South Carolina environment can get kind of crazy. So I'm going to give them a win there. I'm going to say they're going 4-3. Then they play at Vanderbilt. I'm going to say they're going to be 5-3. My numbers are off somewhere. Then they play Missouri at home. I think they lose that game. They play Wofford. They win that game. And then they go to at Clemson to end the season. I think they lose that game. So hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, I had them beating Old Dominion, Kentucky, Akron, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, and Wofford. I have them winning 6 games, so I would take the over. I do think South Carolina is a 6-win football team in 2024, but it is very dicey, and I could definitely see why you would take the under at plus money because I have them in that 5 to 6 win range based on just going through their schedule. A quick word from our sponsors, and we end with Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt, going through each SEC team's win total, courtesy of the FanDuel Sportsbook odds for 2024. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. All right, download the Gametime app, create an account, use code Locked On to get $20 off your first purchase. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal even before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Game Time is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets, just like Steve Sarkisian is obsessed with trying to find ways to win a championship at the University of Texas. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats, find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, badminton, and more. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big-time savings. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use Vegas100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, starting with Tennessee. I think Tennessee is going to be interesting, right? Because they have a true freshman quarterback. Well, I guess he won't be a true freshman, right? He'll be a true sophomore. He did play the bowl game against Iowa. He played really well. I think he had like 3 rushing touchdowns. But I think he's going to be a really good player in that offense, right? But, they're also starting a first-time quarterback, right? And so, I think that could be very interesting. But we'll see what Tennessee is able to do in 2024. Their over-under is set at 8.5, right? So if you're betting the over, you think they win 9 or more games. If you're betting the under, you think they are 8-4 or worse. The over odds, -184. Vegas is screaming at you that they think Tennessee will win 9 games in 2024 or more. The under odds, +146. So if you got cojones and you think that Tennessee will only win 8 games or less, you can take that under at +146. A $100 bet will win you $46. We're going to start with their schedule. Chattanooga at home. I believe they win that game, right? Then they play NC State, more than likely where the Panthers play. I believe they win that game. They start off 2-0. At Oklahoma, I gave that win to Oklahoma. So I think Tennessee starts off, 3-1. I skipped the Kent State game. So I think they start off 3-0, and then they lose to Oklahoma on the road, right? Then they play at Arkansas and against Florida. Can't remember how I picked this game on Florida's schedule. I'm not going to lie. Right? But based on looking at it right now, I'm going to say they're going to be at home. Yeah, I think I picked Florida to lose. I'm going to say they win both of those games. So they start off 5-1, right? Then they play Alabama at home. I think I picked Alabama to lose that game, right? So I'm going to say Tennessee wins that game. I still have their only loss up until this point at Oklahoma, right? So they would be 7-1 at this point. They play Kentucky at home. I think they win that game. They play Mississippi State at home. I think they win that game. They go to Georgia. I think they lose. Then they have UTEP and Vanderbilt at the end of their schedule. So I think Tennessee not only will win 9 games, I think they'll win 10 games, right? So the over, not really a great bet. And I don't see a scenario in which they lose 4 games on this schedule, but it could happen. Anything could happen in the SEC, but I would not advise you to bet the under. Definitely would take the over. If I was going to bet it, I'd certainly fade it. But if I was, I think Tennessee will definitely win 9 or more games in 2024. Texas A&M, the over-under is at 8.5, right? It's pretty high, right, for Texas A&M with a new regime under Mike Elko. Of course, you're betting the over if you think they're 9 wins or better. You're betting the under if you think that they're 8-4 like they usually are or worse, right? The over odds +114, under odds -142. Vegas thinks they're closer to 8-4 like they usually are, right? History tips to repeat itself. Notre Dame at home, first game of the season. That's definitely going to be a tough environment. I think Notre Dame goes in there and gets the win. Texas A&M is 0-1. Then they play McNeese. They are 1-1. They go to Florida. They lose that game. They're 1-2. They come back home to play Bowling Green. They win that game, right? Then they play in AT&T Stadium. They against Arkansas, and I believe they're 3-2 at that point with wins against McNeese, Bowling Green, and Arkansas. Then they play Missouri at home. I think they lose that game, so they're 3-3. At Mississippi State, I think Texas A&M wins that game, right? So they're 4-3. LSU, they lose. They're 4-4. At South Carolina wins. They're 4-5. They come home to beat New Mexico State, so they're 5-5. Then they go to Auburn and play Texas at home. I think they lose those 2 games. I think just like Vegas does. I think they're going to be worse than 8.5. I don't even know why their win total is set in 8.5 because I think they go 5-7 once again, which means a lot less under Mike Elko than it did last year under Jimbo Fisher. But it's still a disappointment for Texas A&M. No way anybody, especially anybody listening to this podcast, thinks Texas A&M will win 9 games in 2024. Stop it. I'd put my life savings on the under if I could, but I'm not going to bet on it at all. And then we're ending the show with Vanderbilt. This one is interesting to me. Over under 2.5, right? So they're basically saying that Vanderbilt doesn't even have to win an SEC game for you to hit the over, right? And over odds minus 115. So you'd have to bet 115 to make 100 on the over, and you'd have to bet 105 to make 100 on the under, right? So Vegas is neutral on Vanderbilt. I'm sure everybody in the country outside of people that go to Vanderbilt are neutral on Vanderbilt. So let's go through the schedule, right? You're telling me that Vanderbilt can't win 3 of their 4 non-conference games, or maybe sneak a SEC win in there somewhere. Virginia Tech at home, right? I'm going to give the nod to Virginia Tech on that one, but Vanderbilt should play them close, right? They're still a Power 5 SEC team. Alcorn State at home. Love the the HBCUs. Shout out to the HBCUs. Vanderbilt should win that game. At Georgia State, Vanderbilt, that was going to be tough, right? But I think Vanderbilt should win that game. They might not win it, but I think they should win it, right? So at that point, they are 2-1. At Missouri, they lose. Alabama at home, they lose. At Kentucky, they lose. Ball State is going to be interesting. I'm going to give Vanderbilt a win in that game, right? I think they beat Ball State. So that's 3 wins. They're going to lose to Texas, unfortunately, but we're going to have fun in Nashville. They're going to lose to Auburn. They're going to lose to South Carolina. And then I cut it off, but their last game would be against Tennessee. They're going to lose that game. But I think Vanderbilt can win 3 of their 4 non-conference games. I think they can beat Alcorn State. I think they can beat Georgia State. And I think they can beat Ball State. Right. And even if they somehow were to slip up in one of those games and go 2-2 in the non-con, I mean, they got Kentucky on the schedule. They got South Carolina on the schedule. They could catch those 2 teams slipping like they did last year when they beat Florida. And I can't remember who the other team was. So Vanderbilt, Vegas is neutral on them. I'm not. I'm standing up for Vanderbilt. I'm taking the over. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.